For most people today, the word Freemason immediately brings to mind secret handshakes, mysterious symbols, hidden ceremonies, and endless speculation about what really happens behind closed lodge doors. Yet if we want to understand the true history of Freemasonry, we have to begin long before secret societies became the subject of rumors and conspiracy theories, long before grand lodges were established, long before kings, presidents, philosophers, and revolutionaries joined the fraternity. Because the story begins not in a meeting hall, not in a palace, and not in a political movement, but on dusty construction sites scattered across medieval Europe, where generations of craftsmen spent their lives shaping stone into some of the most extraordinary structures humanity has ever created. Imagine standing in Europe during the High Middle Ages. The skyline looks completely different from anything we know today. There are no steel towers. There are no modern cranes. There are no power tools. Yet rising above towns and cities are enormous cathedrals whose spires seem to reach toward heaven itself. These structures are so vast that they dominate entire landscapes. They can be seen from miles away. Their stained glass windows flood interiors with colored light. Their ceilings soar to astonishing heights. Their stone walls appear almost impossible for medieval technology to have produced. Even now, centuries later, millions of visitors stand inside these cathedrals and wonder how such achievements were possible. The answer lies largely with the stonemasons. These men were among the most skilled craftsmen of their age. Their work required physical endurance, mathematical understanding, artistic judgment, and technical knowledge accumulated across generations. Building a cathedral was not a project measured in months or even years. Often it lasted decades. Sometimes it lasted more than a century. In certain cases, construction continued so long that the people who laid the foundation never lived to see the finished structure. A young apprentice could begin work on a cathedral and grow old before its completion. Entire families sometimes dedicated multiple generations to the same building. The stonemasons responsible for these projects occupied a unique position in medieval society. Most people during the Middle Ages spent their lives within a relatively small geographical area. Travel was difficult. Opportunities were limited. Knowledge was localized. But skilled masons often moved from project to project. As demand shifted from one region to another, they followed major construction efforts. Their mobility exposed them to new ideas, new techniques, and new communities. In many ways, they formed one of medieval Europe's earliest professional networks. A boy entering the craft usually began as an apprentice. This apprenticeship was not casual training. It represented a major commitment. The apprentice was bound to a master mason for years. During this period, he learned everything from the ground up. He learned how different types of stone behaved under pressure. He learned how to identify flaws hidden within rock. He learned how to shape blocks with precision. He learned how to use tools properly. He learned how to work safely in dangerous environments where a single mistake could result in injury or death. The learning process was demanding. Stone was expensive. Mistakes wasted valuable resources. There was little room for carelessness. The apprentice absorbed knowledge gradually. Day after day, year after year, skill was earned through repetition and discipline. Eventually, the apprentice could become what was often called a fellow of the craft or journeyman. Now he possessed enough expertise to work independently. He could travel. He could seek employment at different construction sites. He could earn wages based on his skills. For many craftsmen, this stage represented freedom. The world opened before them, yet the highest level remained ahead. Only the most capable eventually became master masons. A master mason was far more than a skilled laborer. He functioned as architect, engineer, supervisor, and teacher. He understood geometry. He understood structural forces. He understood design principles. He knew how to coordinate large teams. He knew how to transform a vision into physical reality. His knowledge held immense value. In a world without engineering schools or modern technical manuals, much of this expertise existed only in human memory. The master mason carried knowledge that could not easily be replaced. This reality shaped the culture of the craft. Knowledge was precious. Knowledge was protected. Knowledge was passed carefully from one generation to the next. The organizations that governed these craftsmen were known as guilds. Guilds played a major role in medieval economic life. They regulated training. They maintained standards. They resolved disputes. They protected members. They helped ensure that customers received quality work. Guild membership provided security in an uncertain world. It also created a strong sense of identity. A mason did not simply perform a job. He belonged to a craft. He inherited traditions. He participated in a community that stretched beyond individual construction projects. The guilds had practical purposes, but they also possessed social and spiritual dimensions. Members attended religious services together. They celebrated feast days. They assisted one another during times of hardship. They supported widows and orphans. Long before modern insurance systems existed, guilds often served as vital support networks. The construction sites themselves became miniature societies. When a cathedral project lasted decades, workers needed places to gather. They needed shelter. They needed storage space. They needed areas where plans could be discussed and work coordinated. These structures became known as lodges. At first, the lodge was simply a practical building. It protected tools from weather. It offered workspace. It provided a meeting area. Yet over time, the lodge became something more. It became the center of the craft's social life. Inside the lodge, knowledge was shared. Inside the lodge, apprentices learned from experienced craftsmen. Inside the lodge, traditions were preserved. Inside the lodge, the culture of the craft was maintained. Centuries later, when speculative Freemasonry emerged, it would inherit this concept of the lodge as a gathering place for members united by common values and shared purpose. The intellectual side of medieval masonry deserves particular attention. Modern stereotypes sometimes portray medieval workers as possessing only practical skills. The reality was far more impressive. Master masons required a sophisticated understanding of geometry. Without advanced mathematics, they calculated proportions that allowed immense structures to stand securely for centuries. They designed arches capable of distributing enormous weight. They created vaults that appeared almost weightless despite their mass. They developed systems that transformed heavy stone into graceful architecture. Geometry held special significance during this era. Many medieval thinkers believed mathematical relationships reflected divine order. The universe itself appeared governed by proportion and harmony. To understand geometry was not merely to understand measurement. It was to glimpse the underlying structure of creation. This perspective profoundly influenced architecture. Cathedrals were not simply functional buildings. They were expressions of cosmic order. Their proportions reflected theological ideas. Their designs embodied spiritual aspirations. For the Mason, craft and meaning often existed side by side. The act of construction possessed both practical and symbolic dimensions. As these traditions developed, certain tools acquired symbolic significance. A square ensured right angles and accurate work. Because it represented correctness in construction, it naturally became associated with moral correctness. To act squarely meant to act honestly. The compass established boundaries and measured relationships. It became associated with self-control and discipline. The level ensured that surfaces remained even. Symbolically, it suggested equality. The plumb line established vertical truth. It suggested uprightness of character. These symbolic meanings were not yet the elaborate philosophical system later developed by Freemasonry. However, the seeds were already present. The tools served practical purposes. At the same time, they invited moral reflection. Another important feature of medieval masonry involved recognition. Construction projects frequently required workers to travel. A mason arriving at a new site needed a way to demonstrate his qualifications. How could a master know whether a stranger truly possessed the skills he claimed? Various systems emerged to solve this problem. Historians debate exactly how these systems functioned. Evidence suggests the existence of passwords, signs, and other forms of recognition. These methods allowed legitimate craftsmen to identify one another. Such practices were practical rather than mysterious. They protected standards. They prevented fraud. They ensured that skilled workers received appropriate opportunities. Yet centuries later, these customs would evolve into one of the most recognizable aspects of Freemasonry. The craft also generated legends about its own origins. Human beings rarely content themselves with purely practical explanations. Communities create stories. They connect themselves to larger histories. Medieval Masons were no exception. Documents surviving from the late Middle Ages reveal fascinating attempts to trace the craft back through history. One of the most famous examples is the Regius manuscript, dating from around 1390. This remarkable text combines practical regulations with legendary history. According to its narrative, geometry originated in ancient civilizations. Knowledge passed through generations. Great figures preserved and transmitted wisdom. The craft became linked to ancient learning itself. Modern historians recognize that many details in these accounts are legendary rather than factual. Yet that does not diminish their importance. The stories reveal how Masons understood themselves. They did not see their work as ordinary labor. They saw themselves as heirs to an honorable tradition extending deep into the past. The Cook manuscript and other early documents tell similar stories. Biblical figures appear. Ancient sages appear. The craft becomes part of a grand historical narrative connecting sacred history, classical learning, and medieval construction. These legends would later influence Freemasonry profoundly. When 18th century Freemasons constructed their own origin stories, they drew heavily from traditions already circulating among operative Masons. As the centuries passed, Europe changed. The forces that had sustained medieval Masonry began shifting. The Protestant Reformation transformed religious life. Large cathedral projects became less common in many regions. Architectural styles evolved. Economic systems changed. Guilds gradually lost some of their power. The old world of medieval craftsmanship began fading. Yet something unexpected happened during this transition. In Scotland and England, Certain lodges started admitting men who were not working stonemasons. These individuals had no intention of cutting stone. They were gentlemen, scholars, merchants, professionals, men interested not in construction itself, but in the symbolism and traditions associated with the craft. Exactly why this occurred remains debated. Different regions followed different paths. The process appears gradual rather than sudden. What matters is that a profound transformation began. The tools remained, the language remained, the symbols remained, but their meaning expanded. A square no longer referred only to architecture. It became a lesson about virtue. A temple no longer referred only to a building. It became a symbol of human character. Construction itself became metaphor. The craft was moving from the physical world into the philosophical world. This transition laid the foundation for everything that followed. The operative mason built structures of stone. The speculative mason would seek to build something different. He would seek to build himself. He would seek to improve his character. He would seek wisdom through symbols inherited from an ancient craft. The transformation did not happen overnight. It unfolded over decades. Yet by the beginning of the 18th century, enough changes had accumulated that a new institution was ready to emerge. The medieval world had provided the raw materials. The guilds had provided organizational models. The lodges had provided gathering places. The symbols had provided a language. The legends had provided historical imagination. The Enlightenment would provide something else, a new intellectual climate, a new vision of human potential, a new belief that men from different backgrounds could gather together in pursuit of knowledge, virtue, and fellowship. And in the bustling city of London, amid coffee houses, taverns, commerce, debate, and expanding horizons, those elements would come together to create something that neither medieval Masons nor future conspiracy theorists could fully have anticipated. The world was about to witness the birth of modern Freemasonry. By the early 18th century, Britain was changing in ways that would have been almost unimaginable to the medieval craftsmen who had built the great cathedrals centuries earlier. The country was becoming more commercial. Cities were growing. Trade networks stretched across oceans. Scientific discoveries were reshaping how educated people understood the world. Political power was evolving. Religious conflicts had not disappeared, but after generations of turmoil, there was growing interest in finding ways for people of different beliefs to coexist without constant violence. The intellectual atmosphere of the period would later become known as the Enlightenment. It was an age that celebrated reason. It valued inquiry. It encouraged discussion. It challenged inherited assumptions. People increasingly believed that human beings could improve themselves and improve society through knowledge, education, and rational thought. London stood at the center of many of these developments. It was a city filled with energy. Merchants negotiated deals from distant corners of the globe. Writers published controversial ideas. Scientists conducted experiments. Coffee houses buzzed with conversation. Political arguments filled public spaces. Clubs and societies emerged everywhere. Men gathered to discuss philosophy. They gathered to discuss science. They gathered to discuss literature, politics, religion, trade, and every imaginable subject. The city became a laboratory of ideas. Within this environment, older traditions associated with Masonry found fertile ground. The symbols inherited from operative craftsmen offered something uniquely attractive. They connected practical labor with moral lessons. They connected ancient legends with modern aspirations. They provided a framework through which men could discuss virtue, knowledge, and human improvement without becoming trapped in sectarian disputes. The exact details of Freemasonry's transformation remain partly obscure by time. Historians continue debating how much continuity existed between operative lodges and speculative lodges. Some evidence suggests gradual evolution. Other evidence suggests substantial reinvention. The reality likely contains elements of both. What is certain is that by the early 1700s, lodges composed largely or entirely of non-operative members already existed. These men were not building cathedrals. They were building communities. They were experimenting with a new form of association. Then came a moment that later generations would remember as the symbolic beginning of organized modern Freemasonry. On June 24th, 1717, representatives from 4 London lodges gathered together. The date was significant. It was St. John the Baptist's Day, an occasion already associated with certain Masonic traditions. The lodges met in taverns bearing names that sound almost mythical to modern ears. The Goose and Gridiron, the Crown, the Apple Tree, the Rummer and Grapes. These were not grand halls. They were ordinary establishments where people met, talked, ate, and conducted business. Yet from these modest settings emerged an institution that would eventually spread across the world. The representatives decided to create a central authority. This body became known as the Grand Lodge of London and Westminster, later recognized as the First Grand Lodge of England. The significance of this decision cannot be overstated. Before this moment, lodges largely operated independently. Each developed its own customs. Each managed its own affairs. The creation of a Grand Lodge introduced a new level of organization. Standards could be established. Disputes could be resolved. New lodges could receive formal authorization. A larger identity could emerge beyond individual local groups. What began as a practical administrative decision would ultimately transform Freemasonry into an international movement. The men involved were not revolutionaries plotting the overthrow of governments. They were not occult masters guarding ancient supernatural secrets. Most belonged to the rising middle classes. Many were merchants. Some were professionals. Some were craftsmen. Others held positions within the expanding commercial society of 18th century Britain. They shared certain characteristics. They valued education. They valued sociability. They valued moral respectability. They were interested in self-improvement. They were attracted to environments where status mattered less than character and participation. This last point deserves special attention. 18th century society remained deeply hierarchical. Class distinctions shaped daily life. Titles mattered. Birth mattered. Rank mattered. Yet within the Masonic Lodge, members promoted a different ideal. At least in theory, men met as equals. A nobleman and a merchant could address one another as brothers. A wealthy landowner and a skilled craftsman could participate in the same rituals. Outside the lodge, social realities remained unchanged. Inside the lodge, a symbolic equality prevailed. This concept proved extraordinarily appealing. The organization's principles were articulated more clearly a few years later. In 1723, a Presbyterian minister named James Anderson published a foundational document known as the Constitutions of the Freemasons. This text combined regulations, history, philosophy, and organizational guidance. It became one of the most influential documents in Masonic history. Reading Anderson's constitutions today reveals a fascinating mixture of fact, legend, and aspiration. The historical sections traced Freemasonry's origins back through biblical history. Adam appeared, Noah appeared, ancient civilizations appeared, great builders and sages populated the narrative. Modern historians do not regard these accounts as literal history. Yet that was not really their purpose. The stories provided identity. They connected members to a grand vision of human civilization. They suggested that the pursuit of wisdom and moral improvement stretched across ages and cultures. More important than the legendary history were the principles embedded within the text. Freemasonry would welcome men of different religious backgrounds. Members needed belief in a supreme being. Beyond that requirement, theological disputes were discouraged. Political arguments were similarly restricted. The lodge was intended to be a place where men could meet despite differences that might divide them elsewhere. This approach was revolutionary for its era. Europe had spent generations torn apart by religious conflict. Protestants fought Catholics. Different Protestant denominations battled one another. Political loyalties often overlapped with religious identities. Suspicion and hostility remained widespread. Freemasonry proposed something unusual. It suggested that men could focus on shared moral values rather than divisive doctrinal disagreements. The concept was simple. Its implications were profound. The organization also embraced a distinctive educational method. Instead of presenting philosophical ideas through lectures alone, it taught through ritual and symbolism. New members entered through ceremonies designed to create memorable experiences. These rituals borrowed imagery from the craft traditions inherited from operative masonry. Tools became symbols. Construction became allegory. Architecture became philosophy. The experience of initiation occupied a central place in Masonic life. A candidate entered the lodge in a state symbolizing ignorance. He underwent a carefully structured ceremony. Questions were asked. Lessons were presented. Symbols surrounded him. Gradually, enlightenment replaced darkness. Knowledge replaced uncertainty. The journey represented moral and intellectual awakening. To modern observers unfamiliar with ritual traditions, these ceremonies can seem strange. Yet ritual has always played a powerful role in human societies. Religious traditions employ ritual. Military organizations employ ritual. Universities employ ritual. Nations employ ritual. Ritual creates emotional impact. It transforms abstract ideas into lived experiences. It strengthens memory. It builds community. Freemasonry understood this instinctively. The ritual system evolved around a structure of degrees. The first degree was inner apprentice. The second was fellow craft. The third was master mason. Each degree conveyed distinct lessons. Each represented a stage in personal development. The progression encouraged members to think of self-improvement as an ongoing journey rather than a completed achievement. The Master Mason degree eventually became the emotional center of the entire system. Its most famous element involved the legend of Hiram Abiff. According to Masonic tradition, Hiram served as the master builder of Solomon's temple. 3 men attempted to force him to reveal sacred secrets. He refused. For his loyalty, he was killed. His death and symbolic raising became central elements of Masonic ritual. The story is not found in biblical scripture as Freemasonry presents it. It developed through Masonic tradition. Its significance lies not in historical accuracy, but in symbolic meaning. The legend teaches fidelity. It teaches integrity. It teaches devotion to principle. It confronts mortality. It asks members to consider what values are worth preserving even under pressure. The emotional power of the ritual contributed greatly to Freemasonry's appeal. Members often described their experiences as memorable and transformative. They felt connected not only to fellow participants, but also to generations of Masons who had undergone the same ceremonies before them. As Freemasonry expanded, its symbols acquired increasingly rich interpretations. The square represented moral conduct. The compass represented self-restraint. The level represented equality. The plum represented upright character. The unfinished stone symbolized human potential. The completed stone symbolized personal refinement. The temple symbolized both individual character and ideal society. Every object became a lesson. Every lesson invited reflection. The flexibility of this symbolic language proved important. Different members could draw different meanings from the same symbol. A deeply religious Mason might interpret a lesson through theology. A philosopher might interpret it through ethics. A scientist might appreciate its emphasis on order and rationality. The symbolism accommodated diverse perspectives while maintaining shared traditions. This adaptability helped explain why Freemasonry spread so rapidly. Within only a few decades, lodges appeared throughout Britain. Scotland developed thriving Masonic traditions. Ireland embraced the movement. Continental Europe soon followed. France became one of the most important centers of Masonic activity outside Britain. German states established lodges. The Netherlands embraced the fraternity. New lodges appeared in ports, commercial centers, and capitals. Traveling merchants carried Masonic ideas. Military officers carried Masonic ideas. Administrators, diplomats, and entrepreneurs carried Masonic ideas. Wherever they went, lodges often followed. The movement's growth reflected more than curiosity. Freemasonry filled a social need. The 18th century lacked many of the institutions modern people take for granted. Professional associations were limited. Social clubs were less developed. Opportunities for cross-class interaction were relatively rare. The lodge offered a structured environment where men could build relationships, exchange ideas, and participate in meaningful communal activities. For ambitious individuals, these networks could prove valuable. For isolated individuals, they provided belonging. For intellectually curious individuals, they offered stimulation. For philanthropically minded individuals, they offered opportunities for service. The organization's rapid expansion also generated tension. Not everyone viewed Freemasonry favorably. Its secrecy attracted suspicion. Its private meetings invited speculation. Its willingness to unite men from different religious backgrounds troubled some authorities. Critics asked obvious questions. Why conduct rituals behind closed doors? Why maintain secret signs? Why require oaths? What exactly were members discussing? Some concerns emerged from genuine uncertainty. Others emerged from political or religious hostility. The Roman Catholic Church became one of Freemasonry's earliest and most persistent critics. In 1738, Pope Clement XII issued a formal condemnation. Catholics were forbidden from joining Masonic lodges. The Church expressed concern about secrecy. It objected to religious inclusivity. It feared that Masonic principles might undermine ecclesiastical authority. This conflict would continue for centuries. Subsequent popes reaffirmed opposition. The relationship between Catholicism and Freemasonry became one of the most enduring controversies in modern religious history. Yet opposition often strengthened curiosity. People wondered what made Freemasonry so controversial. Interest increased. Membership continued growing. Public fascination intensified. By the middle of the 18th century, Freemasonry had become one of the most successful voluntary associations in the Western world. Its influence extended far beyond lodge walls. Its ideas circulated through books. Its members occupied positions throughout society. Its symbols became widely recognized. Its rituals inspired fascination. Its reputation expanded. At the same time, internal disagreements emerged. Success rarely eliminates conflict. Different groups developed different interpretations of Masonic tradition. Questions arose regarding ritual details. Questions arose regarding authority. Questions arose regarding authenticity. In England, tensions eventually produced a major division. A rival Grand Lodge formed in 1751. Its members called themselves the Ancients. The original Grand Lodge became known as the Moderns. Both sides claimed legitimacy. Both insisted they represented authentic Masonry. The dispute lasted for decades. Only in 1813 would reconciliation finally occur through the creation of the United Grand Lodge of England. The existence of such disagreements reveals something important. Freemasonry was never a monolithic organization controlled from above. It was a living tradition. Different groups interpreted it differently. Different cultures adapted it differently. Different members emphasized different aspects of its teachings. This diversity would become even more pronounced as Freemasonry crossed oceans and entered entirely new societies. Across the Atlantic, in Britain's American colonies, lodges were already beginning to appear. Merchants, printers, soldiers, and civic leaders joined. Among them was a young printer named Benjamin Franklin. Others would follow. Some would become central figures in one of the most significant political transformations in modern history. And as tensions between Britain and its colonies intensified, Masonic networks, Enlightenment ideals, and revolutionary aspirations would intersect in ways that continue to fascinate historians to this day. By the time Freemasonry crossed the Atlantic Ocean and established itself in Britain's American colonies, the organization was no longer an experimental fraternity meeting in a handful of London taverns. It had become a growing international movement. Its rituals had taken recognizable form. Its symbols were spreading. Its reputation was expanding. And perhaps most importantly, it had become associated with a particular vision of society, one built around education, civic responsibility, moral improvement, and the belief that men from different backgrounds could cooperate despite their differences. The American colonies proved fertile ground for these ideas. 18th century colonial society was still developing. The population was expanding rapidly. New towns appeared. Trade increased. Opportunities existed for ambitious individuals to rise socially and economically. Unlike much of Europe, where centuries of aristocratic tradition often limited mobility, colonial America offered greater flexibility. People still faced significant inequalities, but social boundaries were generally less rigid. In such an environment, Freemasonry found eager participants. One of the earliest and most influential American Masons was Benjamin Franklin. Few individuals better embodied the spirit of the age. Franklin was a printer, a writer, an inventor, a scientist, a diplomat, a political thinker. His life seemed almost impossibly productive. He represented the Enlightenment ideal of the self-made individual, someone who improved himself through discipline, curiosity, and education. When Franklin joined Freemasonry in Philadelphia during the early 1730s, he found an institution that resonated strongly with many of his values. The emphasis on learning appealed to him. The emphasis on sociability appealed to him. The commitment to civic improvement appealed to him. Franklin quickly became active within the fraternity. He eventually served as Grand Master of Pennsylvania. He printed Masonic materials. He promoted the organization. He helped establish its legitimacy throughout colonial society. Yet Franklin's importance goes beyond his personal membership. He demonstrates why Freemasonry attracted so many ambitious men during the 18th century. The lodge functioned as a place where ideas could circulate. It functioned as a place where relationships could form. It functioned as a place where individuals interested in self-improvement could gather together. In a world without modern professional organizations, these networks mattered. A merchant might meet future business partners. A politician might meet influential supporters. A scholar might meet fellow intellectuals. The lodge became a crossroads, connecting people who otherwise might never have interacted. Philadelphia emerged as one of the most important centers of American Freemasonry. This was no coincidence. The city itself occupied a unique position within colonial society. It was a major commercial hub. It was intellectually vibrant. It attracted immigrants from diverse backgrounds. Religious pluralism was more established there than in many other places. These characteristics aligned naturally with Masonic values. As lodges spread throughout the colonies, they became increasingly visible parts of community life. Meetings were private, yet Masons participated openly in public ceremonies. They marched in parades. They laid cornerstones for important buildings. They supported charitable efforts. Far from hiding in the shadows, many 18th century Masons viewed themselves as contributing positively to society. Among the men who joined was George Washington. Today, Washington's Masonic membership is often treated as one of the most famous facts about Freemasonry. Yet at the time, it was neither unusual nor particularly sensational. Washington was initiated into a Virginia lodge in 1752. Like many members, he appears to have appreciated the fraternity without making it the center of his life. His military responsibilities and later political leadership left little time for frequent lodge attendance. Still, he remained associated with the organization throughout his life. His membership would later become enormously important to Masonic identity. As the first president of the United States, Washington embodied national virtue in the minds of many Americans. Any institution connected to him benefited from that association. The famous image of Washington participating in the cornerstone laying ceremony for the United States Capitol in 1793 became a powerful symbol. Dressed in Masonic regalia, he helped conduct a public ritual that linked the new republic with the fraternity. For supporters, this event demonstrated Freemasonry's respectability and patriotic character. For critics, it later became evidence of imagined hidden influence. The reality was simpler. Freemasonry had become a respected part of elite and middle-class social life. Its presence at civic ceremonies reflected that status. As the colonies moved closer to revolution, Freemasonry's role became increasingly complex. This is one of the most misunderstood chapters in Masonic history. Countless books, documentaries, and conspiracy theories claim that Freemasonry secretly orchestrated the American Revolution. The evidence does not support such claims. The revolution was not a Masonic plot. No secret Grand Lodge directed colonial resistance. No hidden council of Masons controlled events from behind the scenes. The causes of the revolution were broad and deeply rooted. Disputes over taxation, arguments about representation, conflicts regarding political authority, economic grievances, intellectual influences from Enlightenment philosophy. These forces existed independently of Freemasonry. The revolution would not suddenly disappear if Freemasonry had never existed. Yet dismissing Masonic influence entirely would also be misleading. The truth lies somewhere between conspiracy fantasy and complete irrelevance. Many revolutionary leaders were Freemasons. Many were not. This distinction matters. George Washington was a Mason. Benjamin Franklin was a Mason. Paul Revere was a Mason. John Hancock appears to have been associated with Masonry. Many military officers belonged to lodges. At the same time, several equally important revolutionary figures never joined. Thomas Jefferson was not a Mason. John Adams was not a Mason. Samuel Adams was not a Mason. Thomas Paine was not a Mason. Alexander Hamilton was not a Mason. Clearly, Masonic membership was not a requirement for revolutionary commitment. However, Masonic networks sometimes facilitated communication. Men who met through lodges often trusted one another. Shared membership created bonds. Those bonds could prove useful during periods of political uncertainty. When revolutionary committees formed, some members already knew each other through fraternal connections. When military officers interacted, Masonic relationships occasionally strengthened cooperation. These effects were real. They simply should not be exaggerated into claims of centralized control. More significant than networking was the overlap between Masonic values and revolutionary ideals. Freemasonry promoted concepts that resonated strongly with the political language of the era. The emphasis on equality within the lodge reflected broader challenges to inherited privilege. The emphasis on self-governance mirrored Republican ideas. The emphasis on liberty and individual moral responsibility aligned with arguments against arbitrary authority. Again, these ideas did not originate exclusively within Freemasonry. They circulated widely throughout Enlightenment thought. Yet lodges served as places where such values could be practiced and reinforced. The relationship was reciprocal. The Enlightenment influenced Freemasonry. Freemasonry reflected Enlightenment values. Revolutionary leaders drew from the same intellectual environment. The connections existed, but they were not conspiratorial. During the Revolutionary War, another fascinating aspect of Masonic culture occasionally emerged. Masonic brotherhood theoretically transcended national boundaries. A Mason was expected to recognize fellow Masons regardless of political allegiance. This ideal sometimes produced remarkable moments. Stories circulated of opposing officers showing one another courtesy because of shared membership. Prisoners reportedly received better treatment from fellow Masons. Communication occasionally occurred across enemy lines. Historians debate the accuracy of individual anecdotes, but the broader principle was genuine. Many Masons sincerely believed that fraternity created obligations extending beyond politics. Of course, such ideals had limits. Masonic brotherhood did not prevent war. It did not stop Masons from fighting one another. British Masons and American Masons still took opposing sides. The reality of political conflict often outweighed fraternal sentiment. Yet the existence of these cross-national bonds reveals how seriously many members took the concept of universal brotherhood. As the revolution progressed and independence became reality, Freemasonry entered a new phase. The fraternity was no longer merely a colonial extension of British institutions. It became thoroughly American. New state Grand Lodges emerged. American traditions developed. Membership expanded. Public respectability increased. The young republic proved especially receptive to fraternal organizations. The social structure of the United States encouraged voluntary associations. Citizens formed clubs, churches, educational societies, political organizations, charitable groups. Freemasonry fit naturally into this culture. Alexis de Tocqueville, observing American society decades later, famously remarked on Americans' tendency to create associations for almost every purpose imaginable. Freemasonry thrived within precisely this environment. By the early 19th century, membership included businessmen, professionals, military officers, judges, and politicians. Joining a lodge often signaled respectability. It demonstrated civic engagement. It suggested commitment to moral values and community service. The fraternity became woven into local life across much of the country. Masonic lodges appeared in large cities. They appeared in small towns. They appeared on the frontier. Where settlers established communities, lodges often followed. In some places, a Masonic lodge appeared almost as quickly as a church. This expansion reflected practical realities. Frontier life could be lonely. Communities were scattered. Social institutions remained limited. The lodge provided fellowship. It provided mutual support. It provided continuity. For men moving westward into unfamiliar territory, these benefits carried genuine significance. At the same time, myths about Masonic influence continued growing. The association with famous founders encouraged speculation. People noticed that some prominent leaders belonged to the fraternity. From this observation, more extravagant conclusions emerged. If Washington was a Mason, some wondered perhaps Masons secretly guided the nation. If Franklin was a Mason, perhaps Masonic ideas shaped government itself. Such claims oversimplified history. The founders held diverse beliefs. They often disagreed intensely. Many were not Masons at all, yet symbols and associations proved powerful. The image of Freemasonry became linked to the founding era. This connection remains influential today. Many Americans continue viewing the fraternity through the lens of revolutionary history. For Masons, these associations became a source of pride. For critics, they became evidence of hidden influence. Neither interpretation fully captures reality. The actual story is more nuanced. Freemasonry neither created the United States nor stood entirely apart from its development. Rather, it participated in the same intellectual and social currents that shaped the Revolutionary Age. The fraternity offered networks, values, and relationships that some founders found useful and meaningful. Beyond politics, American Freemasonry also emphasized charity. This dimension often receives less attention than symbolism or historical controversy. Yet for many members, charitable work formed one of the organization's most important purposes. Lodges assisted widows. They assisted orphans. They supported members facing hardship. They contributed to local causes. These efforts reflected teachings about brotherhood and moral obligation. The emphasis on practical benevolence helped strengthen Freemasonry's reputation. People could see tangible results. The fraternity was not merely discussing virtue. It was attempting to practice it. Still, success inevitably attracted scrutiny. As membership expanded and influence grew, some Americans became uneasy. Questions emerged about secrecy. Questions emerged about favoritism. Questions emerged about whether Masons granted unfair advantages to fellow members. These concerns simmered beneath the surface for years. Eventually, they would erupt into one of the most dramatic crises in American Masonic history. A mysterious disappearance. A public scandal. A political movement dedicated to opposing Freemasonry itself. For the first time, large numbers of Americans would openly challenge the fraternity's place within democratic society. And the controversy that followed would threaten the very survival of American Freemasonry. For decades after the American Revolution, Freemasonry enjoyed a level of respectability that few organizations could match. Its lodges multiplied. Its membership expanded. Prominent citizens joined. Public ceremonies attracted crowds. Masonic cornerstones were laid beneath important buildings. Newspapers reported lodge activities. Communities often viewed local Masons as responsible, charitable, and civically engaged men. To many Americans, Freemasonry seemed woven naturally into the fabric of the young republic. Yet beneath this success lay tensions that had never fully disappeared. Some people remained uneasy about secret societies. Others worried about the influence of private networks. Some religious leaders distrusted organizations that operated outside church authority. Still others questioned whether Masons truly treated all citizens equally, or whether membership created hidden advantages unavailable to outsiders. For years, these concerns remained scattered and limited. Then one event transformed them into a nationwide movement. The story began with a man named William Morgan. Even today, nearly 2 centuries later, historians continue debating exactly what happened to him. The uncertainty surrounding his disappearance became one of the reasons the controversy exploded so dramatically. Morgan lived in western New York during the 1820s. He claimed to be a Mason, although the details of his Masonic background remained disputed. At some point, he decided to publish a book revealing Masonic rituals and ceremonies. Exposés of secret societies were not entirely uncommon, but Morgan's project arrived at a particularly sensitive moment. Some local Masons viewed the planned publication as a betrayal. Efforts were made to stop him. Legal charges appeared. Financial pressure was applied. Tensions escalated. Then, in 1826, Morgan vanished. He was arrested on relatively minor charges. He was released. He was taken into custody again. Witnesses reported seeing groups of men escorting him from place to place. After that, he disappeared. No confirmed trace of him was ever found. The mystery immediately captured public attention. Rumors spread rapidly. Had Morgan been murdered? Had he been kidnapped? Had he been secretly transported elsewhere? Had he voluntarily fled? No one knew for certain. The lack of clear answers only intensified suspicion. Many Americans reached a simple conclusion. They believed Masons had silenced Morgan because he threatened to expose their secrets. Whether or not that conclusion reflected the full truth, it became politically explosive. The public reaction was swift and powerful. People who had previously ignored Freemasonry suddenly viewed it through a new lens. Questions that once seemed abstract now felt urgent. If Masons could make a man disappear, what else might they be doing? If Masons protected one another regardless of circumstances, could they be trusted in positions of public authority? If secret oaths bound members together, did those oaths conflict with loyalty to democratic institutions? The Morgan affair touched deep anxieties within American culture. The United States was built upon ideals of openness, citizenship, and public accountability. Many Americans believed government should operate transparently. Public officials should answer to voters. Institutions should be visible and understandable. Freemasonry's secrecy now appeared suspicious rather than intriguing. Its rituals seemed less like harmless traditions and more like potential threats. Whether fair or unfair, perception became reality. The result was one of the most remarkable political movements in American history. The anti-Masonic movement emerged with astonishing speed. What began as outrage over Morgan's disappearance evolved into a broader critique of Freemasonry itself. Critics argued that secret societies were fundamentally incompatible with democratic values. They claimed Masons favored fellow members in business, law, and politics. They claimed Masonic obligations interfered with public duty. They claimed secret oaths created hidden loyalties that ordinary citizens could neither observe nor challenge. These arguments resonated with many voters. For the first time in American history, a major political party formed around opposition to a specific private organization. The anti-Masonic Party became the nation's first significant third party. This fact alone demonstrates the scale of the controversy. Modern Americans often assume third parties are a recent phenomenon. In reality, the anti-Masonic Party was already testing the limits of the two-party system nearly 2 centuries ago. The movement achieved real success. Anti-Masonic candidates won elections. Newspapers supported the cause. Mass meetings attracted large audiences. Political conventions were organized. In 1831, the anti-Masonic Party even held what is often considered the first national presidential nominating convention in American history. Ironically, an innovation later adopted by all major parties emerged from opposition to Freemasonry. The movement's strongest support came from parts of New York, Pennsylvania, and New England. These regions had large populations of active Masons, making concerns about influence more visible. Local scandals reinforced public suspicion. Stories circulated about judges protecting fellow Masons, businessmen favoring Masonic associates, officials placing fraternity above civic duty. Some stories were exaggerated. Some are probably true. The important point is that many citizens believed them. Trust began eroding. For Freemasonry, the consequences were severe. Membership declined sharply. Lodges closed. Public hostility increased. Men resigned from the fraternity to protect their reputations. In some communities, identifying openly as a Mason became politically risky. Organizations that had once proudly advertised their activities suddenly found themselves on the defensive. The scale of the decline shocked many observers. Some believed Freemasonry might disappear entirely from the United States. The fraternity's leaders faced difficult questions. How should they respond? Should they defend secrecy more aggressively? Should they reveal more information to the public? Should they reform controversial practices? There were no easy answers. The Morgan affair also exposed deeper tensions within Freemasonry itself. The fraternity taught morality. It taught integrity. It taught brotherhood. If Masons had indeed participated in illegal efforts against Morgan, those actions directly contradicted Masonic principles. Many members recognized this contradiction. Even loyal Masons condemned wrongdoing. Some argued that individuals responsible for misconduct should be punished. Others insisted the fraternity itself should not be blamed for the actions of a few members. These debates reflected an enduring challenge faced by all large organizations. How much responsibility should an institution bear for the behavior of individual members? The anti-Masonic movement answered aggressively. It treated the fraternity itself as the problem. Many Masons answered differently. They argued that the principles remained sound even if some members failed to live up to them. This disagreement would shape public discussions for years. Religious opposition also intensified during this period. Certain Protestant groups joined criticism of Freemasonry. Some ministers argued that Masonic rituals resembled religious practices too closely. Others objected to the organization's inclusive approach to faith. If Freemasonry welcomed men from different religious traditions while emphasizing shared moral values, did that undermine specific theological doctrines? Many clergy believed it did. As a result, anti-Masonic sentiment spread through both political and religious channels. The fraternity suddenly faced pressure from multiple directions. Yet despite these challenges, Freemasonry survived. One reason was that the anti-Masonic movement eventually expanded beyond its original focus. Political coalitions shifted. New issues emerged. Debates about banking, tariffs, westward expansion, and slavery increasingly dominated national politics. Opposition to Freemasonry gradually lost urgency. Many voters moved on. The anti-Masonic Party itself declined. Some members joined the Whig Party. Others entered different political movements. By the 1840s, the organized anti-Masonic challenge had largely faded. Freemasonry slowly recovered. New members joined. Lodges reopened. Public hostility diminished. The fraternity never fully returned to the unquestioned prestige it had enjoyed before the Morgan affair, but it regained stability. The crisis left lasting lessons. American Masons became more cautious. They recognized that secrecy could generate suspicion. They understood that public trust could not be taken for granted. Many lodges increased charitable activities and community engagement to demonstrate positive contributions. The fraternity adapted. The Morgan affair also permanently altered how Americans viewed secret societies. Even today, discussions about Freemasonry often echo concerns first amplified during the 1820s. Questions about transparency, questions about influence, questions about loyalty, questions about accountability. These themes remain remarkably familiar. The controversy may have faded, but the underlying issues never disappeared. As Freemasonry rebuilt itself during the 19th century, another development transformed its future. The United States was expanding westward. New states entered the Union. Railroads spread. Cities grew. Industry accelerated. The nation was becoming larger, wealthier, and more complex. Freemasonry expanded alongside it. Lodges appeared across frontier territories. Membership increased again. The fraternity became deeply embedded within American civic life. By the middle of the 19th century, Masonic halls stood in countless communities. Many local leaders belonged to lodges. Public ceremonies once again attracted attention. The organization seemed stronger than ever. Yet new challenges were approaching. The issue that would dominate American history for generations was slavery. And as sectional tensions intensified, Freemasonry faced a difficult test. Its teachings emphasized brotherhood. Its members lived in a nation increasingly divided against itself. When civil war finally erupted, Masons would find themselves fighting on opposite sides of the battlefield. The ideals of universal fraternity would collide with the brutal realities of national conflict. And the question would become painfully clear. Could brotherhood survive when a country could not? By the middle of the 19th century, Freemasonry had survived one of the greatest crises in its history. The anti-Masonic movement had shaken the fraternity. Membership had fallen. Public trust had been damaged. Critics had predicted decline and perhaps even extinction. Yet the organization endured. As American society expanded westward and industrialized, Freemasonry once again found opportunities to grow. New lodges appeared in frontier settlements. Existing lodges rebuilt their numbers. The fraternity adapted to changing conditions while preserving traditions that linked members to earlier generations. For many Americans, joining a lodge became part of respectable adult life. A merchant might belong. A doctor might belong. A lawyer might belong. A farmer, a shopkeeper, a military officer, or a local politician might belong. Freemasonry was not confined to one profession or one class. Its appeal crossed many social boundaries. This broad membership base became one of its greatest strengths. At the same time, the United States itself was moving toward a catastrophe that no fraternal bond could fully prevent. The issue of slavery increasingly dominated national politics. Arguments intensified. Compromises failed. Trust between North and South eroded. By 1861, civil war erupted. The conflict would become the bloodiest war in American history. Hundreds of thousands would die. Communities would be shattered. Families would be divided, and Freemasons, like other Americans, would find themselves on opposing sides. The Civil War created a profound challenge for Masonic ideals. The fraternity taught brotherhood. It taught unity. It taught obligations extending beyond politics and social divisions. Yet now members who had once sat together in lodges were wearing different uniforms and fighting for different causes. Union Masons and Confederate Masons faced one another across battlefields. The reality was unavoidable. Whatever universal brotherhood meant, it did not eliminate political conflict. It did not erase moral disagreements. It did not prevent war. Nevertheless, stories emerged throughout the conflict that illustrated how seriously many Masons took their obligations. Some of these stories are well documented. Others have grown through retelling and may contain elements of legend. Taken together, they reveal the remarkable emotional power that Masonic identity held for many 19th century members. One of the most famous examples involves the Battle of Gettysburg. According to widely repeated accounts, a wounded Confederate officer recognized a Union officer as a fellow Mason and gave a distress signal associated with the fraternity. The Union officer reportedly responded by ensuring humane treatment. Whether every detail occurred exactly as later versions describe remains debated. Yet similar accounts appear throughout the war. Masons sometimes assisted captured enemies. They sometimes ensured proper burials. They sometimes extended courtesies across battle lines. These acts did not end the conflict. They did not change military outcomes, but they reflected a belief that shared humanity could survive even amid extraordinary violence. For many members, these stories became evidence that Masonic brotherhood possessed genuine meaning. The fraternity emerged from the war with its institutions largely intact. Unlike political parties or military organizations, it transcended the conflict. When peace returned, lodges resumed normal operations. Veterans from both sides continued participating. In a nation struggling to rebuild, Freemasonry offered one of the few spaces where former enemies could theoretically meet as equals. The extent to which this ideal was realized varied greatly. Regional bitterness remained strong, yet the possibility itself mattered. While America confronted civil war, Freemasonry was simultaneously expanding around the globe. The 19th century represented the great age of imperial expansion. European powers extended influence across Africa, Asia, the Pacific, and other regions, where merchants, soldiers, administrators, and settlers traveled. Masonic lodges often followed. The British Empire played a particularly important role. At its height, Britain governed territories spanning enormous portions of the world. Officials posted to distant colonies frequently sought familiar institutions that could provide community and social connection. Freemasonry served that purpose effectively. Lodges appeared in India. They appeared in South Africa. They appeared in Australia. They appeared in Canada. They appeared in countless colonial cities and settlements. For expatriates living far from home, the lodge offered continuity. Its rituals were familiar. Its traditions were familiar. Its social structure was familiar. A Mason arriving in a foreign land could often visit a local lodge and immediately find connections. The fraternity functioned as a global network long before modern communications made international networking commonplace. Yet Freemasonry's spread was not simply a story of British influence. Different countries adapted the fraternity in different ways. France developed its own powerful Masonic traditions. French lodges often emphasized intellectual discussion and political engagement more strongly than their British counterparts. The relationship between Freemasonry and French society became especially significant during periods of political change. Many advocates of liberal reforms found Masonic ideas attractive. Religious tolerance, individual rights, constitutional government. These themes resonated with reformers throughout Europe. As a result, Freemasonry sometimes became associated with progressive political movements. This association generated admiration among supporters and suspicion among opponents. In Italy, the fraternity became linked with the Risorgimento, the movement for national unification. Many advocates of a unified Italian state belonged to Masonic lodges. Their efforts often brought them into conflict with conservative political forces and with the Catholic Church. The connection between Freemasonry and liberal nationalism strengthened perceptions that the organization represented modernity, reform, and secular governance. Supporters celebrated this role. Critics viewed it as evidence of dangerous political influence. The truth varied depending on time and place. Freemasonry itself was never a single political movement. Its members held diverse opinions. Yet certain values associated with the fraternity often aligned more naturally with liberal constitutional ideas than with rigid authoritarian systems. Latin America provides another fascinating example. Throughout the 19th century, independence movements swept across the region. Colonies sought freedom from European control. New nations emerged. Political identities formed. Within this turbulent environment, Masonic networks sometimes played meaningful roles. Several major independence leaders were Freemasons. Simón Bolívar is among the most famous. His efforts contributed to the liberation of vast portions of South America. José de San Martín similarly became a central figure in independence struggles. Both men moved within circles where Masonic influence existed. Once again, however, it is important to avoid exaggeration. Freemasonry did not create Latin American independence. Economic pressures, political grievances, Enlightenment ideas, local circumstances, international developments, all contributed. Yet lodges occasionally provided organizational structures where ideas could be exchanged and relationships strengthened. The fraternity became one thread woven into a much larger historical tapestry. As Freemasonry expanded globally, its relationship with religion remained complex. In Protestant-majority countries, the organization often enjoyed relative acceptance. In Catholic countries, tensions frequently intensified. The Catholic Church continued opposing Masonic membership. Popes issued condemnations. Clergy warned believers against participation. The reasons extended beyond secrecy alone. Many church leaders feared that Freemasonry promoted a vision of religion based on general morality rather than specific theological truth. The fraternity's willingness to welcome men from different faiths appeared threatening to institutions claiming exclusive spiritual authority. These conflicts sometimes carried significant political consequences. In countries where church and state remained closely connected, opposition to Freemasonry could become intense. Lodges were periodically suppressed. Members faced restrictions. At times, the fraternity operated semi-secretly. Yet suppression rarely eliminated it completely. When political conditions changed, Masonic activity often re-emerged. This pattern repeated itself repeatedly across Europe and Latin America. Another remarkable feature of 19th century Freemasonry was its extraordinary adaptability. Different cultures interpreted the fraternity through local traditions. Different jurisdictions developed unique customs. Different social classes emphasized different aspects of membership. Some lodges focused heavily on ritual. Others emphasized charity. Others emphasized intellectual discussion. Others functioned largely as social and networking organizations. The flexibility of Masonic symbolism made such diversity possible. A symbol can carry multiple meanings simultaneously. The square and compass meant one thing to a devout Christian, something slightly different to a secular philosopher, something else again to a businessman interested primarily in ethical conduct. The symbols created unity without requiring complete uniformity. This adaptability contributed enormously to Freemasonry's global success. By the late 19th century, millions of men around the world had encountered Masonic ideas. The fraternity had become one of the largest and most influential voluntary associations in history. Its membership included kings. It included presidents. It included military leaders. It included writers. It included scientists. It included ordinary workers and shopkeepers. The range was astonishing. At the same time, growth brought challenges. The larger an organization becomes, the more difficult it becomes to maintain a single identity. Disagreements emerged regarding doctrine. Disagreements emerged regarding recognition. Disagreements emerged regarding authority. Perhaps the most significant division involved the question of religion. Traditional Anglo-American Freemasonry required belief in a supreme being. This requirement remained fundamental. French Freemasonry gradually moved in a different direction. In 1877, the Grand Orient of France removed the requirement that members believe in God. This decision represented a major turning point. Supporters viewed it as a logical extension of intellectual freedom. Critics viewed it as abandoning essential Masonic principles. The result was a lasting schism. Many English-speaking Grand Lodges refused to recognize the Grand Orient. Separate branches of World Freemasonry increasingly developed. This division continues into the present. It demonstrates that Freemasonry's famous commitment to universal brotherhood has always encountered practical limits. Members often disagreed profoundly about what the fraternity should be. The 19th century also witnessed the creation of numerous Masonic-related organizations. Not every member wished to stop after the basic degrees. Additional systems emerged offering further rituals, symbolism, and fellowship. The Scottish Rite became one of the most prominent. The York Rite became another. Each developed elaborate structures and traditions. These organizations did not replace ordinary lodge membership. Instead, they expanded opportunities for involvement. Perhaps the most publicly visible of these groups eventually became the Shriners. Founded in the United States during the 1870s, the organization combined fraternity with philanthropy and public spectacle. Its colorful uniforms, parades, and charitable activities made it instantly recognizable. In later generations, Shriners Hospitals for Children will become one of the most respected charitable institutions associated with Freemasonry. Through such organizations, the fraternity extended its influence beyond lodge rooms into broader public life. By the dawn of the 20th century, Freemasonry appeared stronger than ever. Its membership numbers were rising. Its global reach was immense. Its public reputation in many countries remained respectable. Its charitable work expanded. Its influence touched countless communities. Few observers could have predicted the storms that lay ahead. The 20th century would bring world wars, revolutions, dictatorships, and ideological struggles unlike anything the fraternity had previously faced. Some of those new regimes would view Freemasonry not merely with suspicion, but with outright hostility. For the first time in its history, entire governments would attempt to destroy Masonic institutions completely. Lodges would be raided, members would be imprisoned, properties would be confiscated, and in some countries, being identified as a Freemason could become a matter of life and death. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, many Freemasons looked toward the future with confidence. The fraternity had survived religious opposition. It had survived political controversies. It had survived internal disagreements. Its lodges stretched across continents. Its membership included influential figures in government, science, business, education, and the arts. In many countries, Freemasonry appeared firmly established as part of civil society. Yet beneath the optimism of the early 20th century, powerful forces were gathering. Industrialization had transformed economies. Urbanization had transformed communities. Nationalism was intensifying. Political extremism was growing. The old world that had nurtured Freemasonry was entering a period of profound instability. The First World War erupted in 1914. For the first time, industrial technology combined with modern nationalism to produce destruction on an unprecedented scale. Millions of soldiers marched into battle. Millions would never return. Entire societies were shaken. Families lost fathers, sons, brothers, and friends. The war shattered assumptions about progress and civilization. For Freemasonry, the conflict created painful contradictions. The fraternity taught universal brotherhood, yet Masons found themselves fighting one another in opposing armies. British Masons fought German Masons. French Masons fought Austrian Masons. Brothers in the symbolic sense became enemies in the political sense. The reality was harsh. Whatever bonds existed within the fraternity, they could not overcome the demands of national loyalty during wartime. Still, many Masons continued believing that the ideals of brotherhood remained meaningful even amid conflict. After the war ended in 1918, some hoped that organizations like Freemasonry might help rebuild international understanding. The devastation seemed to prove the dangers of hatred and division. Perhaps institutions promoting tolerance and cooperation could contribute to a more peaceful future. For a brief period, that hope seemed possible. But history took a darker turn. The years following the First World War brought economic instability, political upheaval, and widespread disillusionment. Revolutions erupted. Governments collapsed. New ideologies competed for power. In this volatile environment, authoritarian movements gained strength. And many of those movements viewed Freemasonry as an enemy. One of the earliest and most consequential examples emerged in Russia. Before the Russian Revolution, Freemasonry existed within segments of Russian society, particularly among educated elites and reform-minded intellectuals. Russian lodges never became as large or influential as those in Britain or America, but they were present. When the Bolsheviks seized power in 1917, however, the situation changed dramatically. Communist ideology rejected organizations that operated independently of the state. It distrusted private associations. It condemned institutions associated with bourgeois society. Freemasonry embodied many characteristics the new regime opposed. It was voluntary. It was independent. It encouraged private loyalty and association outside government control. For communist authorities, this made it inherently suspicious. Russian Freemasonry was suppressed. Lodges disappeared. Membership became impossible. The fraternity survived only in exile and memory. This pattern would later repeat throughout much of Eastern Europe as communist governments expanded their influence. Yet the greatest persecution Freemasonry would ever face emerged not from communist revolution, but from fascism. In Italy, Benito Mussolini gradually consolidated power during the 1920s. His regime demanded loyalty above all else. Independent organizations represented potential rivals. Freemasonry, with its international connections and liberal traditions, appeared dangerous. Italian lodges were eventually outlawed. Properties were seized. Activities ceased. The message was clear. The state would tolerate no competing source of authority. Even more severe events unfolded in Germany. When Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party rose to power in 1933, Freemasonry became one of many targets. Nazi ideology was built upon concepts fundamentally opposed to Masonic principles. Freemasonry emphasized universal brotherhood. Nazism emphasized racial hierarchy. Freemasonry promoted tolerance. Nazism promoted exclusion and persecution. Freemasonry encouraged international connections. Nazism glorified extreme nationalism. The conflict was inevitable. Almost immediately after taking power, the Nazi regime moved against German lodges. Buildings were raided. Records were confiscated. Organizations were dissolved. Masonic property was seized by the state. Members lost positions. Many faced investigation. Propaganda campaigns portrayed Freemasonry as part of a vast conspiracy supposedly working against Germany. Nazi leaders frequently linked Freemasons with Jews in their rhetoric. This association reflected long-standing conspiracy theories that combined anti-Masonic and anti-Semitic narratives into a single imagined enemy. According to Nazi propaganda, secret networks of Jews and Freemasons supposedly manipulated world events for their own purposes. These claims were baseless, yet they served a political function. They provided scapegoats. They justified repression. They encouraged citizens to view independent organizations as threats. For German Freemasons, the consequences were devastating. An institution that had existed openly for generations disappeared almost overnight. Thousands of members were harassed. Some were arrested. Some were imprisoned. Some eventually found themselves in concentration camps. Within the camp system, certain prisoners identified as Freemasons wore inverted red triangles, marking them as political prisoners. The fraternity's symbols, traditions, and records became evidence against them. What had once been a source of pride became a source of danger. The persecution extended beyond Germany itself. As Nazi influence spread across Europe, Masonic organizations in occupied territories faced similar treatment. Lodges were closed. Libraries were confiscated. Archives disappeared. Historical records accumulated over centuries were destroyed or scattered. The cultural losses alone were immense. Entire collections documenting local history vanished. Yet even under these conditions, some Masons attempted to preserve their traditions. Rituals were remembered. Documents were hidden. Connections were maintained whenever possible. The fraternity's survival depended not on buildings or property, but on individuals committed to preserving it. The Nazi assault on Freemasonry illustrates an important historical reality. Totalitarian regimes often fear voluntary associations. Organizations like lodges, churches, unions, and civic groups create networks independent of government control. They teach people how to organize. They create loyalties outside the state. They provide alternative sources of meaning and identity. Authoritarian systems frequently view such institutions as threats. Freemasonry was not unique in facing persecution. Many other organizations suffered as well. But its experience reveals how seriously dictatorships take the power of independent civil society. Meanwhile, Spain experienced its own struggle. Following the Spanish Civil War, General Francisco Franco established a dictatorship that would last for decades. Franco viewed Freemasonry with intense suspicion. He blamed it for numerous political and social problems. His regime portrayed Masons as enemies of traditional Spain. Thousands faced investigation. Some were imprisoned. Many concealed their affiliations. Masonic activity largely disappeared from public life. Once again, a government attempted to erase the fraternity. Across Europe, the pattern repeated itself. Independent thought, independent association, independent networks. These were precisely the things authoritarian governments sought to eliminate. Freemasonry became a target because it represented values inconsistent with total control. Yet despite extraordinary pressure, the fraternity survived. World War II eventually ended. Nazi Germany collapsed. Fascist regimes weakened or disappeared. Gradually, Masonic organizations re-emerged. Lodges reopened. Records were recovered when possible. Membership resumed. In some countries, rebuilding took years. In others, it took decades. But the tradition endured. The post-war period brought new opportunities. Particularly in the United States, Freemasonry entered what many historians consider its golden age. The years following World War II witnessed extraordinary growth. Membership surged. Returning veterans joined lodges in large numbers. Communities expanded. Economic prosperity increased. Civique participation flourished. Freemasonry benefited from all these trends. By the 1950s, American Masonic membership reached unprecedented levels. Millions belonged. Lodges were active in nearly every town and city. Masonic buildings stood prominently within communities. Parades, charitable events, and public ceremonies reinforced visibility. For many Americans, joining a lodge seemed almost a natural step in adult life. The fraternity appeared healthier than ever. Yet beneath the surface, long-term changes were already beginning. The social conditions that had sustained Freemasonry for generations would not remain constant. New forms of entertainment were emerging. New patterns of work and family life were developing. Cultural values were shifting. And while membership numbers remained impressive, challenges that would later reshape the fraternity were quietly taking form. At the same time, another issue continued haunting American Freemasonry. The fraternity proclaimed brotherhood. It proclaimed equality. It proclaimed universal human dignity. Yet in practice, racial segregation remained deeply embedded within many of its institutions. Black Freemasons had created their own proud and legitimate tradition through Prince Hall Masonry. But mainstream recognition remained incomplete. The contradiction between ideals and reality could no longer be ignored indefinitely. As the civil rights era approached, Freemasonry would be forced to confront questions that reached to the very heart of its identity. Questions about race. Questions about equality. Questions about whether the fraternity truly practiced the principles it so often preached. If there is one chapter in the history of Freemasonry that reveals both the strength of its ideals and the limits of its practice, it is the story of race in America. For centuries, Freemasons spoke about brotherhood. They spoke about equality within the lodge. They taught that men should meet on a level regardless of wealth, status, or background. The symbolism of the fraternity reinforced these ideas constantly. The level reminded Masons that all human beings share a common dignity. The teachings emphasized moral worth rather than inherited rank. The rituals celebrated universal principles rather than social hierarchy. Yet American society developed within a system profoundly shaped by racial inequality. Slavery existed from the colonial period onward. Segregation followed emancipation. Legal discrimination became deeply embedded in institutions across the nation. No organization operating within that society could entirely escape its influence. Freemasonry was no exception. The story begins during the Revolutionary Era, at a time when ideals of liberty and equality filled political speeches. A free black man named Prince Hall sought membership in the fraternity. Prince Hall was born sometime around the mid-18th century. Much about his early life remains uncertain. What is clear is that he became one of the most important figures in African American history. He was an abolitionist, an advocate for education, a community leader, and eventually the founder of an enduring Masonic tradition. In 1775, Prince Hall and 14 other free black men were initiated into a British military lodge attached to a regiment stationed in Boston. This detail is significant. Military lodges often operated differently from civilian lodges. Their members traveled frequently. Their circumstances encouraged flexibility. As a result, the British military lodge accepted Hall and his companions as legitimate candidates. They became Masons, not symbolic Masons, not unofficial Masons, not honorary participants. They were properly initiated members of a recognized lodge. Then history intervened. The American Revolution intensified. British forces eventually departed Boston. The military lodge left with them. Hall and the other black Masons suddenly found themselves in an unusual situation. They possessed Masonic membership, but no functioning lodge of their own. Naturally, they sought affiliation with local lodges. The response they received exposed a painful contradiction. The white lodges of the era largely refused to accept them. The fraternity that preached brotherhood would not fully extend that brotherhood across racial lines. Rather than abandon their efforts, Hall and his companions pursued another path. They appealed directly to England. Their petition eventually reached the Grand Lodge of England. After reviewing the matter, the Grand Lodge issued a charter in 1784 establishing African Lodge number 459. This charter was entirely legitimate. It granted full authority. It recognized the lodge as a lawful part of the Masonic world. No serious historical argument exists against its validity. African Lodge possessed the same essential legitimacy as countless other lodges operating under recognized authority. This moment proved enormously important. Instead of remaining dependent upon white American lodges that refused acceptance, black Freemasons now possessed their own institutional foundation. Prince Hall became the leading figure in this emerging tradition. Under his guidance, African Lodge developed into far more than a fraternal organization. It became a center of leadership and community life. Hall used his position to advocate for education. He advocated against slavery. He encouraged civic participation. He worked to strengthen black communities during a period when opportunities remained severely restricted. The lodge provided fellowship. It provided mutual aid. It provided dignity. Perhaps most importantly, it provided self-determination. When mainstream institutions excluded African Americans, Prince Hall Masonry created its own space. Following Hall's death in 1807, the movement continued growing. Additional lodges were established. New jurisdictions emerged. Gradually, a distinct Masonic tradition developed. Today, it is known collectively as Prince Hall Freemasonry. Throughout the 19th century, Prince Hall lodges played crucial roles within black communities. This importance cannot be overstated. In many places, African Americans faced exclusion from educational institutions, professional organizations, political structures, and economic opportunities. Prince Hall Lodges helped fill some of these gaps. They developed leaders. They organized charitable efforts. They provided networking opportunities. They fostered mutual support. Many prominent Black figures became Prince Hall Masons. The fraternity offered resources and relationships that strengthened community life during difficult times. Yet despite sharing the same rituals, the same symbols, the same degrees, and the same essential teachings as white Freemasonry, Prince Hall Masons faced a persistent obstacle: recognition. The issue sounds technical. In reality, it reflected one of the most significant moral failures in American Masonic history. Recognition within Freemasonry means that one jurisdiction accepts another as legitimate. Members can visit one another's lodges. They can participate together. They acknowledge each other as authentic Masons. For generations, most white American Grand Lodges refused to recognize Prince Hall jurisdictions. The official explanations varied. Some cited technical arguments about jurisdictional boundaries. Others raised procedural concerns. Still others pointed to historical complexities. Yet beneath these justifications lay an uncomfortable truth. Race was the central issue. Many white Masons simply did not wish to meet Black Masons as equals. This refusal created an obvious contradiction. How could an organization proclaim universal brotherhood while denying recognition to men who practiced the same fraternity solely because of race? The contradiction became increasingly difficult to defend. Throughout the 19th century and well into the 20th, Prince Hall Masons built their institutions despite exclusion. Rather than waiting for acceptance, they created their own traditions, their own leadership structures, their own charitable programs, their own culture. The result was remarkable resilience. Prince Hall Freemasonry did not merely survive discrimination. It flourished. Its members included educators, lawyers, ministers, business leaders, civil rights advocates, community organizers. Many of the most respected figures in African American public life passed through Prince Hall Lodges. These lodges often functioned as leadership academies long before such a term existed. Men learned organizational skills. They learned public speaking. They learned administration. They learned service. The impact extended far beyond Masonic membership itself. During the era of segregation, Prince Hall Masonry represented one of the strongest independent institutions within Black America. The irony remained painful. White Masons often praised brotherhood while maintaining separation. Prince Hall Masons practiced the same rituals while being denied full acceptance. The gap between principle and reality could not be ignored forever. As the 20th century progressed, broader social changes forced these issues into public view. The civil rights movement challenged racial discrimination across American society. Schools were desegregated. Voting rights expanded. Legal barriers began falling. Institutions throughout the country faced pressure to examine their practices. Freemasonry was among them. Questions that had long been avoided became unavoidable. If all Masons are brothers, why were Black Masons excluded? If the level symbolizes equality, why did recognition remain denied? If moral character matters more than race, why maintain separation? These questions carried moral weight. They could not be dismissed easily. Progress came slowly, very slowly. The first major breakthrough occurred in 1989 when the Grand Lodge of Connecticut formally recognized Prince Hall Masonry. This step may sound administrative, but its significance was profound. For the first time in modern history, a mainstream American Grand Lodge openly acknowledged Prince Hall Masons as legitimate equals. Visitation became possible. Cooperation became possible. The symbolic barrier began breaking down. Other jurisdictions gradually followed. Recognition spread. Northern states generally moved first. Western jurisdictions often followed. Resistance remained strongest in parts of the South. The process unfolded unevenly. Even today, complete recognition has not been achieved everywhere. The majority of American jurisdictions now recognize Prince Hall Masonry. That represents substantial progress. Yet some still do not. The persistence of these divisions continues generating debate. Supporters of recognition argue that the issue should never have existed in the first place. Prince Hall lodges possessed legitimate origins. Their members practiced authentic Freemasonry. The refusal to recognize them reflected racial prejudice rather than genuine Masonic principles. Critics of delayed recognition point out that every year of continued separation undermines the fraternity's credibility when speaking about equality and brotherhood. Many Prince Hall Masons approached recognition cautiously. After all, they'd spent generations building independent institutions. Some questioned whether recognition from organizations that had excluded them for so long truly mattered. Others welcomed reconciliation while insisting that historical injustices should not be forgotten. These perspectives reflected understandable complexity. Recognition represented progress, but progress does not erase history. The legacy of exclusion remains part of the story. What makes this chapter particularly important is that it reveals something broader about human institutions. Every organization possesses ideals. Every organization tells stories about itself. The real test comes when those ideals encounter difficult social realities. Freemasonry taught brotherhood. Many individual Masons genuinely believed in that principle. Yet institutions often reflected the prejudices of the societies around them. The result was a contradiction that lasted generations. At the same time, the story also reveals the power of persistence. Prince Hall Masons refused to abandon the fraternity's principles simply because others failed to uphold them. Instead, they built communities that embodied those principles more consistently. They created opportunities where none existed. They demonstrated leadership under difficult circumstances. They preserved traditions while adapting them to their own needs. Their history stands as one of the most significant achievements within the broader Masonic world. By the late 20th century, Freemasonry faced another challenge entirely. The issue was no longer primarily exclusion. It was survival. Membership numbers that had once seemed unstoppable began falling. Lodges that had overflowed with members during the 1950s struggled to attract younger generations. Buildings grew quieter. Average ages increased. Questions emerged about relevance. The fraternity had survived persecution. It had survived wars. It had survived political movements dedicated to its destruction. Now it faced something more subtle. A changing society that increasingly seemed to have less interest in joining organizations at all. And that challenge would prove every bit as significant as the crises that came before it. If someone had stood inside a busy American Masonic lodge during the 1950s, it would have been difficult to imagine that the fraternity would someday face a membership crisis. The numbers were extraordinary. Across the United States, millions of men belonged to Masonic lodges. Meetings were crowded. Waiting lists sometimes existed. Community leaders frequently held membership. Large Masonic buildings stood proudly in cities and towns. Many seemed almost permanent, physical symbols of stability and civic life. The fraternity appeared deeply woven into the fabric of society. Yet history often moves in ways that seem invisible while they are happening. The forces that eventually transformed Freemasonry did not arrive all at once. They emerged gradually. A cultural shift here, a technological change there, a new social expectation, a new pattern of daily life. Each development seemed manageable on its own. Together, they reshaped the environment that had allowed organizations like Freemasonry to flourish. The first challenge was not unique to Masonry. It affected countless voluntary associations. Throughout much of the 19th and early 20th centuries, joining organizations had been a normal part of adult life. People belonged to lodges. They belonged to civic clubs. They belonged to church groups. They belonged to neighborhood associations. Participation created social networks. It created identity. It created community. Many Americans expected that responsible citizens would contribute time and effort to such organizations. Then patterns began changing. Television entered homes. Suburban development altered social life. Entertainment options expanded dramatically. People increasingly spent leisure time differently. Activities that once required leaving home could now be enjoyed from a living room. The change seemed subtle at first, yet over time it transformed how people interacted with one another. An evening that might once have been spent attending a lodge meeting could now be spent watching television. A social gathering once organized through local associations might be replaced by other forms of recreation. These developments did not destroy community, but they changed its structure. Freemasonry found itself competing for attention in ways previous generations had never experienced. The challenge deepened as work patterns evolved. The post-war economy created new opportunities. Professional careers became more demanding. Geographic mobility increased. Families relocated more frequently. Long-term connections to specific communities weakened. Many people no longer spent their entire lives in one town, surrounded by familiar institutions. Modern life became faster, more flexible, more fragmented. The lodge, by contrast, remained rooted in traditions developed centuries earlier. Membership required commitment. Meetings required attendance. Rituals required preparation. Relationships required time. For men balancing careers, family responsibilities, and countless other obligations, participation became harder. Another important factor involved changing family dynamics. During much of the period when Freemasonry expanded most rapidly, many households operated according to traditional gender roles. Men often worked outside the home, while women handled much of domestic life. Whether one views that arrangement positively or negatively, it undeniably created conditions that made participation in male fraternal organizations easier. As social expectations changed and more women entered professional careers, family responsibilities increasingly required shared effort. Time became more precious. An evening spent at a lodge meeting carried different implications than it had for previous generations. Many men simply found it harder to justify regular participation. At the same time, younger generations increasingly viewed institutions differently. The secrecy that had once attracted curiosity now often generated skepticism. In earlier eras, belonging to a secret society seemed exciting. It suggested mystery. It suggested exclusivity. It suggested participation in something special. By the late 20th century, many people associated secrecy with distrust rather than intrigue. Questions emerged immediately. Why keep secrets? What purpose do they serve? What is being hidden? Freemasons often answered that the secrets involved little more than ritual details and methods of recognition. Yet the perception remained difficult to overcome. The elaborate ceremonies themselves also became more challenging to explain. For members who appreciated symbolism and tradition, the rituals remained meaningful. For outsiders accustomed to increasingly informal culture, they sometimes seemed strange. Formal language, memorized ceremonies, symbolic dramas. These practices belong to an older world, a world many younger people no longer understood instinctively. The result was a growing cultural gap. The very elements that made Freemasonry distinctive sometimes made it difficult to recruit new members. The issue of gender also became more prominent. For most of its history, Freemasonry had defined itself as a fraternity for men. This policy reflected both historical precedent and the social norms of earlier centuries. By the late 20th century, however, attitudes toward gender equality had changed dramatically. Organizations excluding women increasingly faced criticism. Many people questioned whether male-only membership remained justifiable. Defenders argued that single-gender organizations served legitimate purposes. They pointed to traditions. They pointed to the value of male fellowship. They pointed to the existence of women's organizations as well. Critics responded that exclusion contradicted modern ideals of equality. The debate continues today. Regardless of one's position, there is little doubt that changing attitudes toward gender affected public perceptions of Freemasonry. Potential members sometimes viewed the organization as outdated before learning anything else about it. Racial issues produced similar challenges. As discussed previously, the history of recognition between mainstream and Prince Hall Masonry remained unresolved in many jurisdictions. Younger generations often found these divisions difficult to understand. A fraternity preaching universal brotherhood while maintaining incomplete racial recognition seemed contradictory. Even where progress occurred, historical controversies continued influencing public perception. Meanwhile, broader changes in civil society affected nearly every voluntary organization. Political scientists and sociologists documented declining participation across numerous institutions. Membership fell not only in Masonic lodges, but also in service clubs, veterans organizations, and other traditional associations. The problem extended beyond any single fraternity. The way people formed communities was changing. Technology accelerated these transformations. The internet connected individuals across vast distances. Social media created new forms of interaction. Online communities emerged around shared interests. For the first time in history, people could find companionship, information, and networking opportunities without ever entering a physical meeting space. This development solved some problems while creating others. It expanded access. It reduced isolation. Yet it also weakened incentives to join traditional organizations. Why attend meetings if relationships could be maintained online? Why seek professional contacts through a lodge if digital platforms offered alternatives? Why join a fraternity for information if information was available instantly through the internet? Freemasonry found itself competing not merely with other organizations, but with entirely new ways of living. The numbers reflected these changes dramatically. In the United States, membership peaked at roughly 4 million during the mid-20th century. Over subsequent decades, that figure steadily declined. Millions left through death, resignation, or inactivity. New members joined, but not quickly enough to replace losses. By the early 21st century, membership had fallen to around 1 million. The reduction was staggering. A decline of approximately 75% transformed the organization. Many lodges merged. Others closed entirely. Large buildings designed for hundreds of members became difficult to maintain. Financial pressures increased. The average age of active members rose steadily. Some observers interpreted these trends as evidence of inevitable extinction. They argued that Freemasonry belonged to another era. According to this view, the fraternity represented a solution to problems that modern society addressed differently. Networking could occur online. Charity could be organized through professional nonprofits. Education was widely available. Social interaction took countless forms. Why would younger generations commit themselves to rituals and traditions developed centuries earlier? The argument carried weight. It was not the entire story. Despite declining numbers, many lodges remained active. New members continued joining. Some younger men found themselves drawn precisely to the elements others considered outdated. In an age of constant distraction, ritual offered focus. In an age of rapid change, tradition offered continuity. In an age of digital communication, face-to-face fellowship offered something increasingly rare. For these individuals, Freemasonry's old-fashioned qualities represented strengths rather than weaknesses. The organization responded in different ways. Some lodges embraced modernization. They improved websites. They used social media. They streamlined administrative procedures. They sought greater public visibility. They emphasized charitable work and community service. The goal was simple: demonstrate relevance to contemporary society. Other lodges moved in the opposite direction. Rather than modernize extensively, they doubled down on tradition. Formal dress codes returned. Ritual standards became stricter. Historical education received greater emphasis. Supporters believed that Freemasonry's uniqueness constituted its greatest asset. If the fraternity became too similar to ordinary social clubs, they argued, it would lose the very qualities that made it valuable. The debate remains unresolved. Both approaches have achieved successes in different contexts. Some modernized lodges have attracted new members. Some traditional lodges have experienced remarkable growth. The variation suggests that no single solution exists. Different communities respond to different strategies. Financial challenges added further complexity. Large Masonic buildings often require substantial maintenance. Heating costs, insurance costs, repairs, property taxes in some jurisdictions. All these expenses continue regardless of membership levels. When membership falls significantly, financial strain increases. Many lodges sold historic buildings. Others rented portions of their facilities. Some merged with neighboring lodges to share resources. These decisions were often painful. Buildings represented history, memories, identity, yet practical realities could not be ignored. The fraternity's charitable work also evolved. Historically, Masonic charities often provided assistance unavailable elsewhere. Widows received support. Orphans received care. Members facing hardship received aid. Modern welfare systems and professional charitable organizations altered that landscape. Freemasonry adapted by focusing increasingly on specialized projects. The Shriners' hospitals became among the most visible examples. Their work treating children regardless of families' ability to pay earned widespread respect. Educational scholarships expanded. Community programs developed. Disaster relief efforts increased. The charitable impulse remained. The methods changed. Throughout these developments, one question persisted. What exactly is Freemasonry for in the modern world? This question touches the heart of the organization's future. Historically, the fraternity provided many benefits simultaneously. Networking, friendship, education, charity, moral reflection, ritual experience, community status. Today, alternatives exist for each of these functions individually. Professional associations provide networking. Nonprofits provide charitable opportunities. Religious congregations provide spiritual community. Online platforms provide social connection. Freemasonry's challenge is that it must explain why its unique combination still matters. For members, the answer often seems obvious. The value lies not in any single element, but in their combination. The symbolism, the fellowship, the shared journey through degrees, the connection to history, the opportunity for service. Together, these create an experience difficult to replicate elsewhere. For non-members, however, that value can be difficult to communicate, especially in a culture increasingly skeptical of institutions and traditions. The result is a fraternity standing at a crossroads. It has survived revolutions. It has survived persecution. It has survived scandals and wars. Now it faces a quieter challenge. Not destruction, not suppression, but relevance. Can an organization rooted in 18th century ideals continue speaking meaningfully to 21st century society? Can ancient symbols still inspire modern people? Can traditions survive without becoming museums? Can brotherhood flourish in an age of digital connection and social fragmentation? The answers remain uncertain. Yet one thing is clear. The debate about Freemasonry's future has become inseparable from another issue that has followed the fraternity for centuries. Its reputation. Because while membership declined, public fascination never truly disappeared. If anything, modern media and the internet created new forms of attention. Unfortunately for Freemasonry, much of that attention centered not on charity, fellowship, or philosophy. It centered on conspiracy theories. And as the digital age expanded, those theories spread farther and faster than ever before. As Freemasonry entered the 21st century, it found itself in a strange position. Its influence was often exaggerated. Its membership was often misunderstood. Its rituals were often mocked. Its history was often distorted. Yet despite all of this, public fascination never disappeared. In some ways, the fascination became stronger than ever. The internet transformed information into something available instantly. Millions of people who had never met a Mason could now watch videos claiming to expose hidden truths. They could read theories connecting Freemasonry to world events. They could explore websites promising revelations about secret power structures. They could encounter endless claims about symbols, governments, revolutions, financial systems, and hidden rulers supposedly operating behind the scenes. Few organizations in history have generated as many conspiracy theories. The reasons are not difficult to understand. Freemasonry possesses symbols. It possesses rituals. It possesses traditions that outsiders do not immediately understand. It includes famous historical figures among its members. It uses language about enlightenment, knowledge, architecture, and moral transformation. All of these characteristics make it an ideal target for speculation. When people encounter something unfamiliar, imagination often fills the gaps. The process is as old as human history itself. Yet the modern conspiracy culture surrounding Freemasonry often tells us more about human psychology than about Freemasonry. People naturally seek patterns. They seek explanations. They want complex events to have understandable causes. When societies face uncertainty, conspiracy theories provide a tempting answer. Instead of confronting complicated economic forces, political conflicts, cultural changes, or historical accidents, one can imagine a hidden group pulling the strings. The explanation becomes simple. Too simple. Freemasonry has frequently served as that imagined hidden group. Sometimes it is accused of controlling governments. Sometimes it is accused of controlling banks. Sometimes it is accused of controlling the media. Sometimes it is accused of orchestrating revolutions. Sometimes it is accused of suppressing ancient knowledge. The specific claims change. The basic structure remains the same. A visible symbol appears. A famous Mason appears in a position of influence. A historical event occurs. Connections are drawn. Patterns are imagined. A conspiracy is born. The French Revolution provides one of the earliest major examples. When revolutionary violence shocked Europe, many observers searched for explanations. Some found it difficult to accept that social tensions, economic problems, political failures, and intellectual movements could produce such dramatic upheaval. A secret conspiracy seemed easier to understand. Books appeared claiming that Freemasons and the Bavarian Illuminati had orchestrated everything. The theory spread widely. Yet the evidence never supported it. Certainly, some revolutionaries were Freemasons. Many were not. Some Masons supported reform. Others supported monarchy. Others attempted to avoid politics altogether. The reality was messy and complicated. The conspiracy theory was neat and simple. For many people, simplicity proved more appealing. The same pattern repeated across centuries. Major events occurred. Conspiracy theories attached themselves to Freemasonry. The organization became a convenient explanation for developments people feared, disliked, or struggled to understand. This process intensified dramatically during the 20th century. Anti-Semitic propaganda frequently merged Jewish conspiracy theories with anti-Masonic conspiracy theories. The infamous forged document, known as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, helped spread fantasies about secret networks controlling world affairs. Nazi propaganda later combined these ideas into a single imagined enemy. Freemasons and Jews were portrayed as partners in vast conspiracies against civilization. The consequences were deadly. Real people suffered because fictional conspiracies were treated as truth. The lesson remains important. Conspiracy theories are rarely harmless entertainment. When taken seriously, they can justify discrimination, persecution, and violence. The internet age accelerated these tendencies. For the first time in history, a person anywhere in the world could access enormous quantities of information without context. A symbol on a building, a photograph of a politician, a Masonic emblem, a historical coincidence. Each could be presented as evidence of hidden control. Videos accumulated millions of views. Websites multiplied. Algorithms rewarded sensationalism. Complex realities struggled to compete with dramatic narratives. And yet, despite all the claims, one problem persists. Evidence. The grand conspiracies never produce convincing evidence. Not because the conspiracies are perfectly hidden. Not because Masons possess supernatural skill, but because the conspiracies do not exist in the form alleged. The historical record reveals something much more ordinary. Freemasons are people. Some have been admirable. Some have been flawed. Some have been influential. Most have been ordinary citizens. Like members of any large organization, they have disagreed with one another constantly. They have supported opposing political parties, opposing governments, opposing military alliances, opposing social movements. If Freemasonry truly operated as a unified hidden power directing world events, history would look very different. Masons would not repeatedly find themselves fighting each other in wars. They would not divide over religion. They would not divide over politics. They would not divide over race. Yet these divisions appear throughout Masonic history. The reality is that Freemasonry has never been a single coordinated force. It has been a loose collection of lodges, jurisdictions, traditions, and individuals linked by shared symbols and shared rituals. Its influence has existed, but it has generally operated through personal relationships, cultural values, charitable activity, and social networks rather than secret control. This distinction matters. Influence is real. Conspiracy is something else entirely. A lodge may help a man build friendships. Those friendships may benefit him professionally. A network may create opportunities. A shared value system may shape decisions. Such things happen constantly within human society. Religious communities do it. Universities do it. Professional associations do it. Families do it. Freemasonry is not unique in this regard. What makes it appear unique is the combination of visibility and secrecy. The symbols are public. The rituals are private. That combination invites imagination. Perhaps the greatest irony in Masonic history is that the actual secrets are relatively mundane. For centuries, critics imagined hidden wisdom capable of transforming civilization. They imagined ancient knowledge preserved since antiquity. They imagined political plans directing nations. Yet the secrets protected within lodges largely concern ritual experiences, symbolic lessons, and methods of recognition. The true value of the fraternity has never been secret information. It has been shared experience. That distinction is crucial. The emotional impact of a ritual does not depend upon possessing forbidden knowledge. It depends upon participation. A ceremony means something because it is lived, not because it is hidden. A friendship matters because it is experienced, not because it is secret. A charitable act matters because it helps someone, not because it is mysterious. This realization brings us back to the central question. Was Freemasonry, really? After 3 centuries of growth, controversy, adaptation, decline, and survival, what remains? The answer depends partly upon perspective. To some members, Freemasonry is a moral system expressed through symbolism. To others, it is a fraternity. To others, it is a charitable institution. To others, it is a tradition linking generations together. Many would say it is all of these simultaneously. The organization has endured because it satisfies needs that remain deeply human. The need for belonging, the need for purpose, the need for friendship, the need for self-improvement, the need to feel connected to something larger than oneself. These needs existed in medieval Europe. They existed during the Enlightenment. They existed during revolutions and world wars. They exist today. The methods used to address them may change. The needs themselves remain. Freemasonry's greatest strength has never been power. It has never been wealth. It has never been secrecy. Its greatest strength has been meaning. Men joined because they found meaning in the symbols, meaning in the rituals, meaning in the friendships, meaning in the charitable work, meaning in the idea that personal improvement matters. The fraternity's greatest weakness has been its failure, at times, to live fully according to its own ideals. The exclusion of women, the racial divisions, the contradictions between universal principles and historical realities. These failures are part of the story as well. No honest history can ignore them. Yet those failures also reveal something important. Freemasonry is not a supernatural institution. It is a human institution, and human institutions always reflect both aspirations and imperfections. The history of Freemasonry is ultimately the history of people trying to create community, meaning, and moral purpose within changing societies. Sometimes they succeeded admirably. Sometimes they fell short. Sometimes they inspired progress. Sometimes they reflected the prejudices of their age. Like all enduring institutions, Freemasonry contains contradictions. That complexity is precisely what makes its history so fascinating. 3 centuries after the first Grand Lodge formed in London, the future remains uncertain. Membership may continue declining in some regions. It may stabilize in others. Reforms may occur. Traditions may persist. New generations may discover value in old symbols, or they may seek meaning elsewhere. History offers no guarantees. Yet regardless of what happens next, Freemasonry has already secured a place in history. It helped shape conversations about tolerance during the Enlightenment. It provided community during periods of rapid change. It contributed to charitable efforts that improved countless lives. It survived persecution by dictatorships. It spread across continents. It influenced culture, architecture, literature, and civic life. Few voluntary organizations can claim such a legacy. And perhaps that is the final mystery. Not whether Freemasons possess hidden knowledge. Not whether secret rulers guide the world. Not whether ancient conspiracies operate in the shadows. The real mystery is why symbols created centuries ago still resonate with people today. Why rituals continue to matter. Why traditions survive. Why human beings repeatedly seek fellowship, purpose, and belonging through shared stories and shared experiences. Freemasonry does not provide a complete answer to those questions. No institution can, but its history offers a remarkable window into them. Across 300 years, millions of men entered lodges seeking something difficult to define. Some found friendship. Some found guidance. Some found opportunities to serve. Some found a sense of continuity stretching backward through generations. Whatever else Freemasonry may be, it has served as a vessel for those human searches. And that, More than any secret handshake, more than any symbol, more than any conspiracy theory, is the reason its story continues to endure. The lodge doors close. The meeting ends. The symbols remain. The questions remain. And the long history of Freemasonry continues as part of the larger history of humanity itself. The story ends here.